we've both been, driven around the area that is present day Normandy and seen a lot of these towns, and
Mhm.
it's still, most of the countryside still bears the scars of those battles, specifically Pointe du Hoc and or Pointe du Hoc, and many of the towns still have bullet holes you can see in walls and things like that. It's really intense to see, and it's hard to understand what it would be like to fight through that until you've actually been there, and that none of the roads are particularly straight. There's not a great way to navigate if you aren't from there. And it just, I could see people getting turned around real easy as they're trying to move in these massive vehicle columns that the Germans have had a long time to familiarize themselves with. And you bring up a great point I'd never really thought about before. For the Americans and the British landing here, this is all their first taste of combat. Most of them, some of them I think had come over from the Pacific, but for most of them, this is their first taste of combat. For the Germans they're fighting, they had to push from wherever they were in Germany all the way to Normandy, and had seen more than their fair share of gunfights as they rolled through Western Europe. So yeah, that notion of new soldier fighting against experienced soldier, I'd never even considered that before. But as you were going through and doing the research here, just again as a soldier yourself, was there any small sort of sensory detail that you picked up on through some of these interviews? Maybe it was from inside a landing craft, or a fight outside of a hedgerow or a church square, that kind of said more than any big battle sequence that you covered.
Probably the smell of death. So in Normandy, there was a lot of cattle, and the German army used a lot of horses. And then obviously then there's the human dead as well. And everybody talked about how bad it smelled. Like Normandy just stank of death. It was everywhere. And that is something that, I've been shot at, things like that, but I've never gone from, and I've smelled dead things, right? But I've never gone from mile where that smell of death is just in your nose all the time. That was one. Another one as well. It's something again you don't even think about, is the fact that these guys were plagued by mosquitoes. Because summer in Normandy, and the mosquitoes would bother some of the guys. They would be driven mad more by mosquitoes than by getting shelled every day, and little things like that, which seems increased, isn't it? It's like, but if you've ever been in somewhere with like really dense mosquitoes and not being able to get away from them, I can almost see that. Like, yeah, I can see how that could get to you more than shelling after a while. That's just seems to be no escape.
Or more just the cumulative effect of you're dealing with shelling, and you can't even get a break in between the shelling because the mosquitoes are coming at you.
Right. Yeah, and the kind of places where a lot of these front lines quite often end up along rivers, don't they? Along rivers, and in densely kind of dense undergrowth and things, because nobody's going to dig in and straight across the middle of a big open field. Not that there's really many of those in Normandy at the time, but it's just these little things about what bothered people, But yeah, I think in terms of like the senses, it's just the sense of smell is something that I probably had not. It's something that I'd considered for, say, the First World War in the trenches. We all kind of have that. Oh yeah, because we all knew there's bodies everywhere. But for Normandy or something, it's just something that you can't. And it's like you can't really picture that. You go there now, it's such an idyllic place. The idea of that place just smelling like rotting flesh everywhere. It's hard to get your head around.
That's something that always struck me, is that I've had the privilege of being able to travel over there with World War II and Normandy veterans, and it's just imagining because I'm stumbling over my words here because it's such a hard thing to describe, but I can imagine what that must be going through their mind, having come to Normandy for the first time in many cases 75, 80 years, and seeing it now, like you said, idyllic and beautiful, and a place you would want to go on vacation and all sorts of stuff. And then their last reference point was possibly the worst place on earth at that time. And just to have what that must have been like for those guys to process that, where this place existed in their head as the worst place on earth, and now you're here, you know, having tea in a French chateau and very comfortable, and you know, people are giving you the hero's welcome, and rightfully so. It must be a strange thing for those soldiers to have experienced coming back.
Yeah, and on the hero's welcome, it wasn't always the case that they were at the time in the war given the hero's welcome, because Normandy had escaped. You know, it wasn't an area that really got bombed or anything. It's not like there's an big industrial center there, so it wasn't really kind of getting bombed. It hadn't really been fought over, during the Battle of France so much. So it really escaped a lot of the war. And by this point, you know, there's been Germans living there for a while. People have just kind of fell into this new way of life. Now, obviously, there's some people who are in the resistance who are actively opposing this. But as with most places in the world, there's a lot of people who just want to go along to get along, right? Or get along to go along. And then all of a sudden, you know, your herd of cows, which has been generations in the farm, you know, and your source of income has just been blown apart by naval gunfire. You know, one of your buildings is now full of troops, or it had someone firing from there, so it's been absolutely leveled, you know, and now you're a refugee. And so a lot of people were quite pissed off because, you know, they were just wanted to get on with their lives, and now everything's gone. And so we do see these pictures of, obviously, certain villages, usually the ones that were kind of got lucky and didn't get fought over. You know, you might get those scenes, but a lot of the times, you know, people are actively angry. I mean, I remember one story from an American soldier in the Cherbourg Peninsula, and she was carrying her dead kid around. He'd been killed by American mortar fire, and she was livid with the American soldiers, as someone who lost a child, you know, would be. So I think we always have to keep in mind when we see these pictures of either the extreme brutality or these extreme moments of, thanks so much, you know, you guys are the best, kind of. The truth is always in the middle with, if you'd have interviewed 100 people from France at the time, I mean, dude, like, look at the city of Caen. Yeah. You know, you've probably been to Caen. That place was flattened by bombing, you know. I do forget, it's been 2 years since I worked on the book now, but I know the number of French civilians killed by Allied bombing around this period was over 10,000. You know, so if you'd lost half of your family, are you really feeling that happy to be liberated? You know, you might have just preferred to just keep going as things were. You know, there's no simple answer. For every human being who lived in that period, there's a different answer, you know. Different shades to
think
it.
About that, and I this is a little bit of a trope at this point to put it in these terms, but 10,000 French people killed during the invasion there. That's 4 9/11s for a small area, you know, for a small population. Yeah, it's that's not nothing.
Yeah, exactly right. So, and like I said, these. You'd got people who had been in part of the resistance who immediately, you know, well, not just immediately, they were very instrumental in helping to shape the battlefield, you know, taking out train lines that could bring out reinforcements, but taking down comms lines, all that kind of thing. And then, you've got other people who, to put it quite frankly, quite happy with the Germans being there. And I think that was one of the things I tried to do with the book as well, because I think especially through film and things, we have been given a very black and white picture of what it was like. And I was kind of surprised by the amount of stories that I came out of. Because I'd always thought, of course, Germans shoot prisoners. The Germans are bad guys, aren't they? But the amount of stories of British, Canadian, American soldiers killing prisoners, like, not every now and again, just pretty much as par for the course. Now, there's a lot of there's reasons for that, a lot of reasons for it, but I was kind of quite shocked by how often it was. And then once you listen to these guys and they kind of give their explanations why it happens, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, and the idea that there is, you know, a whiter than white side in war is quite ridiculous.
This is why these guys talked about how it's hard to, they didn't want to talk about it. You bring that up in the book of it. This is, as kids, we were told, Grandpa doesn't like to talk about this. And, and part of it is because it's hard to explain those things. Some of these guys, it wasn't just because they saw their friends die. It was because they maybe participated in horrible things, or they don't want to necessarily feel lesser than if you're expecting a war story, but all they can complain about was the mosquitoes and things. War is a complicated place, and you're experiencing the extremes of all these different human experiences. And that's a hard thing to explain to people that have never experienced even an extreme of the human experience, never mind multiple. I mean, I think that we look back at World War II specifically with rose-colored glasses and think it's the good war, right? It was the very justified war. It was good versus evil. It was, the American, the British, the West versus the Nazis. It was, painted in these terms that in almost a way that looks down with derision on soldiers that came later. And, when we talk about, we're going through it right now with the war on terror, right? There's things that happened on the battlefield or in combat that are being relitigated as war crimes and things like that. Some of them rightfully so. Some of them, I don't know. We'll see what the process reveals, but the judicial process reveals. But to act like this is some phenomena that soldiers have not always been doing this. This was going on in World War II as well. It's just that those stories weren't being told, and there weren't, helmet cams and things like that to show it. And I think that's an important thing to point out. Of war is terrible. Like, it is a terrible, terrible thing, even when it is a quote unquote good war.
No, absolutely, mate. And I think as well, if you'd have served in that war and you see all the films that kind of came out at the time, and even like up to even Saving Private Ryan, the good guys are still really clean-cut good guys, aren't they? For all of its realism in action, it's still a very rose-painted kind of picture of soldiers. For Granddad to say to the kids, I used to give a cigarette to a woman so that I could, have my way with her. It's just, I think I definitely was one of these people who was very naive about what I was like, and I appreciate the honesty of those people actually telling it as it is in their interviews, because they could have taken it to their grave with them. And I wonder if it's as they got older in their lives and they probably kept witnessing more wars and more wars, they thought, well, maybe we should have been a bit more honest about this. Yeah, because a lot of the guys, when I got to the end of the interviews, there's no one more anti-war than a veteran, right? And I think a lot of these people were kind of coming, because a lot of these interviews are done, these people were at the end of their lives. They were, a lot of them mid-80s, some of them even 90s. And I think they're like, well, if I'm going to leave here, there's one message I'm going to leave behind. It's, I don't want to go through this again. I know a lot of them will, and it's tragic really to think that their last kind of years in life were worried that it was all going to happen again. I think if you'd been through something like that and then you'd had a few decades of relative peace, especially for Europe, when you consider how bloody Europe has been always, to have some peace in Europe for like 30, 40, 50 years, you might be thinking, you know what, maybe it was worth it. And then, over say the last 20 years, and I think a lot of them started to question things. I know it seems to be something that's kind of come out in, like, especially the later interviews that I listened to.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to be hard to see. I mean, right now you've got the two largest armies in Europe at war with each other in an actual shooting war, and that's got to be a strange thing for the very few World War II veterans left behind, and those that have been around for the last couple of years to see happening. I can only imagine what's going through their head.